It always starts quietly. A whisper. A joke at your expense. A subtle shift in the room's energy. A glance that lingers too long. A smile with something venomous beneath it. Most people ignore it. They laugh it off. They pretend not to notice. They tell themselves it's not worth reacting to, until it happens again. Louder, sharper, public, and by then, it's too late. Because disrespect ignored is disrespect approved. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. In a world ruled by power, image, and perception, respect isn't earned, it's enforced. Your response isn't just about them. It's about what everyone watching learns from you. Disrespect is rarely personal at first. It's a test. And if you fail, you're not just seen as weak, you're seen as safe to disrespect again. So when it happens, you act. Not later, not in theory, immediately. But not emotionally. Because here's the first Machiavellian law of handling disrespect. The one who reacts emotionally loses status. The one who withdraws strategically becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability breeds fear. So you go silent. Not passive, silent. You don't flinch. You don't explain. You don't perform. You create a void, a break in their rhythm. A sudden absence of the energy they were trying to manipulate. Stillness is your weapon. Because disrespect feeds on reaction, laughter, defensiveness, appeasement. But when met with cold, calm stillness, it collapses. Revealed for what it truly is, a desperate attempt to assert power. Lesson 1. Disrespect begins as a test, not an attack. Machiavelli never struck first. He watched. He waited. He let his enemies show their full hand. Then responded, never with apology, but with precision. That's your next move. You don't retaliate, you reflect. Not with insult, but with exposure. You meet their smirk with eye contact. Tilt your head slightly, and say, with surgical calm, did you mean it that way? You sure you want to repeat that? That sounded personal. Want to clarify before I respond? Each question is a blade. You're not denying the hit. You're inviting them to double down, to put it on record, to expose themselves. And most won't. Because most who disrespect don't act from courage. They act from calculation. They test boundaries to see who'll enforce them. And when they feel your silence, your gaze, your composed presence, they begin to doubt, not just you, but themselves. And that doubt, that hesitation you plant in them, that's your real power, not revenge, not outbursts. Doubt, because the one who makes others second-guess themselves, who forces correction with just a look, who alters the energy in a room, without a word, doesn't chase respect. They radiate it. But here's where the game sharpens. Most people can hold the line once. One confrontation, one assertive moment. What they can't maintain is consistency. They crack when things feel calm again. They return to softness. They confuse resolution with return, and that's the real mistake. Because if the door reopens, even a little, the test will come again. So here's your third law. Reframe the relationship immediately. No return to normal. No pretending it didn't happen. No soft smiles to reset the energy. You redraw the boundary, in your tone, in your gaze, in your new sharp absence. If the disrespect was public, your silence becomes the lesson. Not through a comeback, through posture. Withdraw your warmth. Tighten your language. Decline their invitations. Not to punish, to educate. And you don't need to explain. They'll feel the This is the difference between being liked and being respected. It's not about dominance through fear. It's about presence through principle. You've shown the room, I am not available for that. And I don't owe you comfort for choosing my standards. And now the current shift. People adjust. Your name gets spoken with more care, more calculation, less assumption, because the person who cannot be disrespected isn't the loudest. It's the one who knows exactly what to do when it happens. Calm, controlled, clear, refusing to trade self-respect for group comfort. That's how you shut it down, before it even starts. Not with anger, not with ego, but with what they never expected: discipline, distance, and full command of the moment. Disrespect is never random. It's a signal, a probe, a flick of the finger to see, can I reach further next time? And the moment you let one slide, one insult wrapped in a joke, one fake compliment, one subtle power play, you've told the room what your silence is worth. And Machiavelli would remind you, once you're seen as easy to violate, regaining control will cost twice the price. So you've held your ground, you went still, you didn't flinch, you didn't explain, you created space and let the weight of your silence do the work. But what happens after that moment is just as critical, because the test doesn't end. People don't always come back with open disrespect. They come back with something worse: subtle disrespect, corrosive, disguised, and calculated. A joke this time, with a smile, an oversight that conveniently excludes you, a passive remark, thrown out like bait, while they study your face for a flicker of reaction. That's when you make your second move. Reinforce the frame with disproportionate consequence. Because Machiavelli never cared about fairness. He cared about effectiveness, and he understood what few are willing to accept. If the consequence matches the offense, it's forgettable. But if the consequence exceeds the offense, it becomes unforgettable. You're not reacting emotionally. You're not escalating. You're sending a message. You don't get to play with me twice. So when the boundary is tested again, you go colder, not louder. If they disrespected you publicly, you return the message publicly, but strategically, not with insults, with surgical rejection. They make a comment, you pause, meet their eyes, then respond to someone else. They ask you a question, you answer with a single word, then shift your attention, move on. They try to reclaim your warmth, you offer them the social equivalent of a closed door: polite, formal, distant. Not aggression, removal. Lesson 2. Silence is a weapon, not a weakness. You're not trying to defeat them. You're showing them something far more chilling. They've lost access. That's what cuts deepest. Not an insult, not a raised voice, but being quietly ignored by someone who once acknowledged you. And this is where most people fail. They want to be liked. They want to smooth things over. They believe that forgiveness is power, that being the bigger person will win admiration. Machiavelli would laugh at that, because respect is not earned through forgiveness. It's earned through calculated consequence, delivered with calm, delivered with silence. And here's where your real leverage begins. People are always watching. They saw the moment of disrespect. They saw your first move, and now they're watching to see, do you mean it, or will you fold? This is your moment to recast your image. Because image, according to Machiavelli, is more powerful than truth. And what you project after conflict becomes your shield, or your exposure. You want your silence to say, he doesn't tolerate that. She won't engage when disrespected. You only get one chance with them. And once your name carries that kind of weight, everything shifts. People speak more carefully. They stop joking loosely in your direction. They introduce you differently, with words like, no nonsense, sharp, intense. That's your new power. You didn't beg for it. You built it. One surgical response at a time. But there's one more layer. Deeper, more difficult, more dangerous. Because not everyone will be silenced by shame. Some don't care about approval. They don't fear reputation. They don't retreat when challenged. They feed off it. These are the disruptors, the chaos agents, the ones who test boundaries not for gain but for and when they meet someone like you, someone calm, composed and unfazed, they do one of two things. They escalate, or they vanish. And if they escalate, that's your cue for the third level of response. Leverage their disrespect against them. You don't react emotionally. You escalate socially. Now you play the room. Now you frame them, with precision, with elegance, with total control. Call attention to their behavior, not by arguing, but by letting their own words echo louder than they ever intended. Say things like, "That's an interesting joke. Do you tell that one at work too?" If you speak to friends like that, "I'd hate to hear how you talk to strangers." Wow, you said that out loud. You're not retaliating. You're spotlighting. You're making them wear their own behavior in public, in front of people who now see exactly what you've seen all along, and suddenly they shrink. Not because you yelled, but because you reflected them back to the room. Small, noisy, insecure. That is the Machiavellian retaliation. Never loud, never rushed, always measured, always surgical, executed with such calm precision that they don't even realize they've just been checkmated. You remain composed, poised, unmoved. You let their disrespect hang in the air, then collapse it into something they now own. That's how power is built in silence, not just by refusing to react, but by turning every insult into a mirror, and every slight into a lesson they won't forget. And the result? You never chase respect again, because now they all know you don't argue, you don't explain, you don't tolerate. You end it, quietly, surgically, permanently, because here's what most people miss. Disrespect doesn't thrive on boldness. It thrives on safety. Not your safety, theirs. They speak freely when they think you won't do anything. They mock because they believe there's no cost. They test you when they assume you won't push back. That is the fuel of most disrespect. Assumption. But Machiavelli understood the truth. Power isn't about striking often. It's about creating the possibility that you might, that at any moment you could respond in a way they didn't expect and can't contain. This is the next level. You become a threat without ever threatening, and you don't need to say a single word. You don't need to be feared. You just need to become harder to predict. From this point on, when someone crosses the line and they already know where the line is, your goal isn't to win them over. It's to make them uncertain. Did I go too far? Why are they so quiet? What are they thinking? Why didn't they react like before? Lesson 3. Reputation is built in the aftermath. That uncertainty becomes your armor, because people avoid what they don't understand. And that avoidance? That's power. This is why Machiavelli warned against being too transparent, too consistent, too readable. A predictable person is a controllable person. A readable leader is a vulnerable one. But when you're silent, unreadable, and precise, when you strike once with surgical coldness and then vanish behind stillness, you become an anomaly. And in any social hierarchy, anomalies shift the dynamic. People begin adjusting around you, not out of fear, but out of instinct, because the mind naturally protects itself from what it cannot decode. So lean into that. Speak less. Observe longer. Let silence stretch past their comfort zone. And when you do speak, make every word land. Here's the psychological twist. Most people think respect comes from being liked. It doesn't. It comes from being felt. When you enter a room and the air changes, when voices lower, posture shifts, tones adjust. That's not charisma. That's presence. And presence is built through controlled contradiction. You don't always respond, but when you do, it cuts. You don't demand power, but you never tolerate violations. You don't ask for respect, but you remove access the moment it's lost. That's how your energy becomes a warning. A calm, quiet, unspoken consequence. But there's one final transformation, something few ever master. You stop reacting to disrespect as if it's personal. You start treating it as data. This is where your mind separates from the average. They hear an insult and feel offended. You hear an insult and think, there it is, the weak spot. You don't flinch. You read it. You see the insecurity behind the jab, the jealousy behind the mockery, the fear hiding in their need to provoke. It's not power they're showing. It's the absence of it. That's the final twist of dominance. Disrespect reveals them, not you. So you log it. You remember, and you move forward, not out of forgiveness, but out of calculation. Do they still get access to you? Do they need to be isolated, publicly or privately? Do you use them as a warning to others, or let them vanish without a sound? You're no longer reacting. You're no longer playing emotional chess. You're orchestrating position. As Machiavelli taught, the highest position of power is when people fear violating your boundary even in your absence. That's when you've won. Not when they admire you, not when they praise you, but when the room adjusts to the idea of you. When your silence carries the same gravity as your presence. Because the people who are never disrespected aren't always the loud. They're simply the ones who made disrespect too expensive. Not through rage, not through revenge, but through disciplined silence, disproportionate consequence, and unapologetic self-enforcement. You're not here to play their social games. You play the power game. And when you do, everything shifts. People hesitate. Their tone softens. Their words become careful, not because you demanded it, but because now they know you're not here to fit in. You're here to be respected. And if they can't offer that, you'll leave them in a silence they won't recover from. There's a moment in every room, subtle but undeniable, when the dynamic recalibrates around you. It happens after the silence, after the line was drawn, after they realize without a single word from you that you're not someone to test. It's not just that people stop disrespecting you. They stop thinking they could. And that's the final Machiavellian layer. You don't just react to disrespect. You transform what you represent in their minds. Because in the end, power isn't about what you do. It's about what people believe you might do. Even if you say nothing at all, you become someone whose limits are unknown, whose silence doesn't mean submission. It signals calculated preparation, whose calm isn't friendliness, it's containment. And here's what most never see. Every time you enforce a boundary, that's not the end. That's the beginning of your reputation test. Not just with the one who crossed you, but with everyone who witnessed it, directly or indirectly. Everyone is watching to see, are you self-regulated, or do you need an audience to hold frame? If you remain composed, no explosion, no apology, no over-explaining. They feel it. Certainty. And certainty is rare in a world addicted to validation and noise. Lesson 4. Control the frame, or be framed. Now this doesn't mean becoming cold or hostile. It means your warmth is now a choice, not a default. You smile when you want to. You speak when your words add value. You give access only to those who've proven they won't take it for granted. This is how you become untouchable. Not through muscle, but through energetic value. And energetic value, it's built by subtraction. You subtract reactivity, neediness, over-explaining, justifying your presence, tolerating even 1% of disrespect, even when it's masked as just a joke. That's when everything changes. The room slows when you enter. People don't interrupt you. They repeat your words later. Because you spoke with precision. Because your silence gave those words weight. You're no longer someone navigating social terrain. You are the terrain. And this is where Machiavelli's most brutal truth lands. Men must be either respected or eliminated. In your world, there is no third option. Because you've made the cost of disrespect too high to risk. And now, they all know it. In modern terms, they either understand your value, or they lose access to it. It's not about revenge. It's about consequence without drama. The people who disrespect you once, then never again, they're not the problem. They're the lesson. But the ones who do it again, subtly, repeatedly, manipulatively, you don't correct them. You disappear from their world. Or worse for them, you rise while they fade into irrelevance. Because in your silence, you exposed them, and in your distance, you reminded them. You were never available. You were merely tolerating them. And once you make that shift, your entire posture toward the world transforms. You no longer try to be liked. You no longer react to indirect attack. You no longer feel the need to prove you're the bigger person. Because now you understand what Machiavelli knew centuries ago. You never have to defend what you refuse to let be touched. They can't disrespect you if they can't reach you. They can't undermine you if you never stood on their approval. They can't provoke you if your silence makes them question their own status. This is the apex of psychological dominance. Not cruelty, not pride, but control. Control over what you respond to. Control over what energy you return. Control over who even gets the chance to see your reaction. That's how kings moved in Machiavelli's world. And that's how you move in yours. Not with noise, not with rage, but with a presence so exact, so disciplined, that violating it once is all they'll ever need to remember. Because after that, you don't just get respect, you become the standard. And now, there's one final move. The rarest one. The one that defines legacy. What do you do when someone disrespects you, and then realizes it was a mistake? You don't punish. You don't forgive. You do something far more powerful. Lesson 5. Disrespect doesn't deserve explanation. It deserves distance. You remain unchanged, no bitterness, no smugness, no warmth, no explanation. You don't meet their apology with validation. You meet it with stillness, with a gaze that no longer looks for them, with energy that no longer shifts to accommodate them, with silence that doesn't seek to repair, because there's nothing left to fix. You let them walk through the new reality you've built, a reality where they're no longer a fact, no longer a variable, just a ghost drifting through your world. This isn't pettiness, it's power by absence, because nothing is more disturbing to someone who tried to shake your frame than discovering you were never dependent on them in the first place. You weren't looking for validation. You weren't seeking their favor. You were never playing by their rules. And that's the final cut. Not only did their disrespect fail to wound you, it elevated you. It made you colder, sharper, more respected, more distant, and ultimately, more untouchable. This is the role Machiavelli would have you play. Not the vengeful prince, striking at every insult, fueled by emotion, but the silent architect of consequence, calm, poised, and just out of reach. The one who doesn't demand respect, because everyone already knows you only make that mistake once. You let others reveal themselves. You let them betray their own image, while you stay composed. No reaction, no drama, just a shift in access they'll never recover from. And then something strange begins to happen. Your name starts circulating, not in gossip, but in whispers of restraint. They say things like, "He doesn't say much, but when he does, I've never seen her lose her cool." You don't want to be on their bad side. Careful with that one. They don't come back around. That's the reputation you've built. One they self-correct around. They double-check their tone. They rephrase mid-sentence. They glance sideways to see if you're watching. Not out of fear, but because your presence now carries weight. And from that moment forward, you never have to fight for respect again. Because you've proven something far rarer than dominance. You've mastered selective presence. You show up only when you choose to. You speak only when it matters. And when you leave a conversation, a room, a relationship, they feel it. Because the person who cannot be disrespected isn't the loudest in the room. They're the one whose attention is no longer guaranteed. So let them talk. Let them guess. Let them wonder what you'll do next. Because deep down, they already know if they cross the line. You won't explain. You won't argue. You won't chase. You'll disappear. And that silence will echo louder than any comeback ever could. Forever.